Thank you, yeah. So my name is Ramona Gonczol, and I'm an associate professor in Romanian language at UCL SSEES and the co-founder and convener of the PROLang research group. I'm also the academic coordinator for SSEES online language evening class program. I just want to say a few words about PROLang, which is a new interdisciplinary initiative set up at SSEES, UCL, by myself, together with a few other colleagues. Lots of people are joining, that's why I'm kind of. PROLang stands for Policy Research and Outreach in the field of language-based area studies, with particular focus on languages of Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe and the Baltic region that we cover through our degrees and evening classes. We offer a total of 18 languages from the region. PROLang aims are to provide a forum for colleagues from the UK and partner universities and beyond to collaborate on interdisciplinary research topics with languages at the core, to interact with policymakers, practitioners, and the public in order to aid and inform wider debates in language-based area studies and cultural, economic, political, and sociological research, to ensure that languages remain in focus in the post-Brexit landscape, to pay special attention to decolonizing the curriculum for language courses by ensuring minorities of any kind are well represented, as well as to create balanced multiple centers of interest. Last but not least, to increase the esteem of SSEES as a global leader in language-based area studies. Tonight, we will discuss about the digital revitalization of Ladino, which is a severely endangered language, also known as judeo-Spanish. Allow me to introduce our wonderful speaker, Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez. Carlos has a PhD from New York University and is currently a UKRI postdoctoral research fellow on Ladino at UCL. Carlos is also a Ladino instructor at the Oxford School of Rare Jewish Languages. His research focuses on the revitalization of Ladino by digital means. He is the co-founder and CEO of Ladino 21 Community Interest Company, a public outreach initiative and digital archive devoted to grassroots documentation of Ladino. Carlos is the author of two recent journal articles, the digital deterritorialization, that's a long word, of Ladino in the 21st century, and the decolonizing Spanish, Ladino, and Chavacano as sites of global Hispanophonia. Carlos also contributed to our popular team-taught course, Languages in Contact Along the Danube, where students from across UCL attend. Carlos, thank you for presenting with us tonight. The floor is yours.
Good evening from London, everybody. Thank you very much, Ramona, for your kind introduction, and thanks to PROLang for coordinating this as well. Before I start, encore merci for Alejandro Acerayuda, my longtime friend and colleague at Ladino 21, for his support, as well as to Lily Khan, my supervisor here at UCL, and everybody else for being in attendance today. Now, please bear in mind that what I'm about to present is a work in progress, which means the usual caveats apply. And without further ado, let the show commence. I will try now to share my screen, including sound and optimization for video clip. And I will try to make it complete so you can all watch the presentation best possible. Can you confirm that you can see the screen properly? Yes? Comment in the chat, yes. Thank you, Jordi. So, as you can see on the screen, the title is The Digital Revitalization of Ladino, from Web 1.0 to 3.0. Now, we will begin with the working definition of Ladino, which is always a complicated and polemic matter. Ladino, aka judeo-Spanish, could be roughly defined as a language spoken by the Jews that were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula in 1492. It has been classified by UNESCO as severely endangered and is currently spoken by less than 50,000 speakers. UNESCO gives a rough estimate of 100,000, but I think that by 2023, this is clearly less than that. As you can see on the screen, there were two main migration waves of Sephardim who left the Iberian Peninsula between the 15th and the 17th century. Today, we're going to focus on the language developed in diaspora in the area represented by the red arrow, meaning the basin of the Mediterranean Sea, what is nowadays Turkey, what is nowadays Greece, etc. Now, it has been customary in the literature to make a distinction between different stages of Sepharad, between Sepharad 1, 2, and 3, originally by Weinrich in 1973, and then by Jacob Hassan, Monique Balbuena, and David Bonis, to which I have added a fourth stage, which I call, unsurprisingly, Sepharad 4. Now, Sepharad 1 is essentially the existence of Ladino, qual language, more than anything else as a co-territorial dialectal variety. This means that from the 2nd century to the 15th century, Ladino did not exist as a vernacular as we know it nowadays. Rather, Jews from the Iberian Peninsula at that time would use the language of their neighbors plus certain words or certain pronunciations specific to them, but this will not be a language on its own. And there was also the word-for-word calque or translation from the Hebrew Bible used for liturgical purposes. Now, after the expulsion, over the 1st century after the expulsion, what we have is the development of Ladino as a koine, meaning as a contact language formed more or less organically on the basis of two or more intelligible varieties, mutually intelligible varieties. And so we can speak of Ladino in that 2nd stage as a co-territorial diasporic vernacular. And this goes roughly until the 20th century, because then we have Sepharad 3, which is a post-co-territorial diasporic vernacular, meaning that people who speak this vernacular do not necessarily inhabit the same nation state or even a contiguous nation state. So it's post-co-territorial in that sense. This phase is accelerated around the mid-20th century, in particular around the 1950s, due to a number of historic political circumstances, including, of course, the Holocaust, the creation of the State of Israel, the so-called wealth tax in Turkey, and the Istanbul pogroms of 1955. And what we have nowadays is a different stage altogether, I would like to argue, which is Ladino on the internet. It is a vernacular / post-vernacular because it's not necessarily spoken fluently. Rather, sometimes we can only hear words, expressions, or proverbs, and also cyber, of course, on the internet. There are certain characteristics of Sepharad for a qualitative leap that justifies us talking about it as a different stage, amongst which there is functional isolation, meaning the creation of spaces where only Ladino is spoken. There is also intergenerational transmission, the fact that the older and the younger generations are coming together on the internet. The internet has also expanded Ladino's domains of use, as well as the vocabulary, including, for instance, loan words across non-contiguous territories, which was a limited aspect prior to Sepharad 4. And finally, the internet has acted not just as a repository of offline realities, but also as a platform that creates its own realities, that is performative in the sense of J.L. Austin, meaning people, for instance, who meet on the internet end up meeting in person as a result. That will be an example of internet performativity. Now, this stage, Sepharad 4, Ladino on the internet, lends itself to what Professor Shmuel Rafael from Bar-Ilan University has called the proverbial Sephardic extraterritoriality. And I quote, "Sephardim preferred to maintain their extraterritorialism, and every time, in keeping with their psychological need, they chose another territory with which to identify. In the meantime, Ladinos served as a liaison between the various geographies and territories in which the Sephardim lived. So that connection now is instantiated on the internet. Now, the first systematic theorization of Ladino on the internet belongs to Michelle Held in her article, Digital Homeland. And here the hyphen is very intentional, because what the internet means, amongst other things, is that the nation and the state no longer need to be together, no longer need to go hand in hand. It might be the case that one is part of the same group or nation without needing to share the same physical territory, the same land, hence the hyphen, to allow for both possibilities. And Held defines digital homelands with the hyphen as follows, and I quote, a virtual territory in which long-lost offline communities, such as the Sephardi one in our case, are reconstructed online, a virtual replacement for the actual Sephardi place, leading to the creation of a contemporary reconstructed Sephardi personal and collective memory that could not have existed otherwise or anywhere else. Now, in particular, she emphasizes the extent to which the internet accelerates Ladino as an ethnic language. I quote, the new Sephardic courtyard forming on the internet is based primarily upon the ethnic language, the vehicle for the recreation of a fragmented offline personal and collective Sephardi identity, thus a replacement for the Sephardi homeland, or rather the system of homelands that Sephardi Jews journey back to, such as Eretz Israel and Jerusalem, Spain, the Ottoman Empire, the State of Israel, to name just a few, is being constructed. Now, of course, Held wrote this article in 2010. At that time, there were only 3 major Ladino virtual communities on the internet. However, as time went by, we witnessed a proliferation in the Marxist sense of Sephardi virtual communities on the internet, to a point where I felt the need to distinguish between digital homelands, as defined by Held on the one hand, and mere Sephardi online communities on the other. In other words, just because you have a space on the internet where Ladino is used to a larger or lesser extent, it does not necessarily mean that you have a digital homeland understood in Held's sense. So I came up with this equation in my 2021 article, which is that a digital homeland needs 2 components: online communities and these 2 aspects, linguistic ethnicization and a sense of home. And how do you achieve linguistic ethnicization plus a sense of home? It boils down, in my opinion, to 4 aspects. First, you need to adopt a Ladino only or a Ladino mostly policy to create a sense of home, a sense of shared nation. The use of language, again, borrowing from the quote from Professor Shmuel Rafael, the use of language is the very vehicle of that nation. So you need to use Ladino as opposed to using all the language to speak about Ladino. Second aspect, you need to put Sephardic voices in decision-making processes, as opposed to making decisions in their stead. Third, you need a many-to-many interaction model. What does that mean? I'm sure you're all familiar with those types of, for instance, WhatsApp groups where the admin or the manager can send messages, but nobody can reply. That is a one-to-many interaction. If you want to create a sense of home and nation, you need for everybody to be able to answer to everybody else within the same community. That is a many-to-many interaction model. And finally, name and place signatures. There are certain places, certain names within the Sephardic imaginary that evoke a certain nostalgia, a certain feeling towards Sepharad. Those need to be present, and when they are present, they activate certain memories, certain feelings, which are necessary for that sense of belongingness. So these 4 aspects. Now, even though I have already distinguished between Sephardi online communities on the one hand and digital homelands on the other, I came to realize that I still needed a more fine-grained, specific distinction. And that's how I decided to resort to this tripartite distinction between Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And here, I'm not so much interested into what exactly each of these labels mean. I'm more than anything else interested in what they allow us to do. What are the specific affordances and aspects of these stages that allow us to do certain things on the internet? So for instance, Web 1.0, it has been dubbed as the mostly read web because in the first stages of the internet, most websites could be read, but if you wanted to reply or say something of your own, typically you created your own website as opposed to interacting with the website you had just read. So that is the Web 1.0. And the best instantiation of that dynamic were email lists. Now, this all changed with the Web 2.0, which was more participative, multi-semiotic social web. You could reply, for instance, in fora or vote certain comments, as in Quora, for instance. All of these participative affordances are characteristic of the 2.0 model that was implemented in 2005 and really flourished in the 2010s, and is nowadays used pretty much by everybody. That includes digital archives, social ephemerals, and gamification, such as Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, video on demand and streamline services such as YouTube or Netflix, and of course the so-called Zoom boom during pandemic times, which is the fact that a lot of people, particularly those who belonged to scattered communities across the globe, such as the Sephardic one, resorted to Zoom to connect, to come together. And finally, the Web 3.0, which is still in its emerging embryonic stages and is characterized by decentralization, blockchain technologies, and token-based economics. Let me move this around to show you clearly that the two use cases that I will be discussing today are the metaverse and sovereign cloud nations, also known as network states. Now, let's begin with the first stage. Web 1.0. Here we have the pioneer of any other Sephardi digital homeland, which is Ladino Comunidad, founded by Rachel Bornik, following the initiative of Moshe Shaul, de Mendicha Memoria. And this is really a game changer. It marks the emergence of Ladino as a cyber vernacular, and it already heralds the participative affordances of Web 2.0. Here, I will show Rachel Bornik herself speaking about the importance of the internet for the revitalization of Ladino in Ladino.
Che quando io lo empecé verso la fin del 1999, demandé a unas cuantas amigas si se van a juntar con mí, si abro un foro semejante, y cuando me dijeron sí, y empecemos con Ladino Comunidad, yo me vino con grande placer, me encanté de ver que se engrandeció tan presto y se expandió tan presto y sin ninguna publicidad, solo de la gente buscando en internet cosas del ladino, de judeo-español, de sefaradí, no sé qué buscaron y nos toparon en internet. Y de día en día hay más cosas como eso que estás haciendo tú ahora, también lo que está haciendo Devinar en Seattle, que están digitando muchas cosas en ladino y metiéndolo en internet, para mantener la lengua viva. También tenemos en Estambul Karen Gerson, que está en Facebook empezando un viejo nuevo cada día y tiene de día en día muchos más cebos que están ahí empezándose. El Internet es la manera de expandir hoy en día, porque nosotros los que sabemos la lengua de nacimiento ya nos estamos muriendo, no vamos a estar aquí. Y gracias al Internet, como lo que estás haciendo tú hoy, nos están sintiendo a nosotros y esperamos que mucha gente en los años venideros nos van a continuar a sentir y tener un poco de querencia en esta lengua, y el Internet es la manera de hacerlo, en mi opinión.
Mashallah. So I trust that you got the gist of it, right? Rachel is essentially amazed at how rapidly the Internet fostered the advancement of Ladino, particularly through Ladino Comunidad, which just started as almost a secret shared by Rachel with her dearest and nearest, and then expanded into what is now today with thousands of members. By the way, that recording is from Alejandro Acero, so big shout outs to him again. And for us to understand Ladino Comunidad, we need to take a step back from the praise, which is well deserved, by the way, and analyze the genealogy of that project. So as I said, the project, even though it was implemented by Rachel Bornik, it was first proposed by Moshe Shaul, for the purpose of perpetuating the language by using a certain type of orthography, i.e. what I have called in other sources, French Ottoman Romanization, as opposed to the Castilian one, defended by Jacob Hassan and others. So here on the screen, you can see in the center, Rachel Bornik here, and to her left, Moshe Shaul. And this was the first International Congress on the Writing and Orthography of Ladino. That is the origin of Ladino Comunidad. It's intrinsically tied to orthographical reforms. This is the orthography of Aquí Jerusalem, the method of transliteration that is used on Ladino Comunidad, used, encouraged, and enforced by not only Rachel, but also a team of moderators who are very effective, very efficient. And this is how I see Ladino Comunidad in terms of revitalization. As I said, that revitalization from the very beginning is tied to a prescriptivist project around French Ottoman Romanization, and it has pedagogical consequences that are congruent with so-called standard language ideology. What do I mean by this? I mean that the kind of Ladino that you can see on Ladino Comunidad is one that presents the language as self-contained, autonomous, written in just one way. And in that sense, it lends itself to be taught as a standard language with clear, well-defined boundaries that are non-negotiable and a unique, specific way of being written that is to be followed rather than questioned or let alone disobeyed. And that reduces Ladino languaging. That reduces necessarily the geolects that are used in Ladino, meaning, for instance, on Ladino Comunidad, the Istanbul geolect prevails as opposed to other ones from Israel or different parts of the world, say ex-Yugoslavia, for instance, right? That also reduces the sociolects, the dialects. For instance, Haketia or Western Judeo-Spanish is not featured for the most part, except for the occasional /tokenistic email in that dialect. Also reduces the registers, right? We're talking about the written register as opposed to any audiovisual appearance. And the scripts, again, is in the Latin script in that specific way of Romanization as opposed to the Castilian one. I'm not saying that this specific way of transliterating Ladino is correct or incorrect, more preferable or less preferable. What I'm saying is that it is de facto equivalent to the reduction of Ladino diversity into that very specific box. And that raises a number of questions, such as, is this the most effective way to revitalize Ladino online? Is this the most fair or the fairest way of going about it, the more just? To what extent is this trade-off between enforcing a certain way of writing Ladino and losing that complexity, which I talked about, necessary? And these are all questions that I pose in genuine spirit of inquiry. I do not have the answers to these questions, hence why it's a work in progress. Now, we reached the Web 2.0, which is, as I said, more participative, more multi-modal, more multi-semiotic. A case in point is, of course, Ladino 21, community interest company, which, as you know, is the platform that I co-direct with Alejandro Acero and offers a number of services that are characteristic of 2.0, passes, digital archive, etc. But we started first and foremost as a digital archive, speaking of which, there are many on the internet apropos Ladino. The first one was that of the Autoridad Nacional del Ladino y su Cultura in 2011. It hasn't posted any new content since 2016. So let's say it's dormant, to say the least. Separad, which is very consistent in the amount and quality of the content it posts, Ladino 21. And then we have channels that feature a collection apropos Ladino, rather than channels that are exclusively devoted to Ladino. And in that category, we can find Wikitongues, which features 3 videos in Ladino. PROLang, which stands for Vanishing Languages and Cultural Heritage, which has a judeo-Spanish collection set in Istanbul. And then the Endangered Language Alliance, which has a judeo-Spanish collection set in New York City. Now, I'm going to show you 2 examples on how to use Ladino on the internet for innovative purposes. First, I'm going to play La Vida Do por el Raqui, which is a classic Sephardic song, now interpreted with a twist of hip hop.
La vida do por el Raqui, no puedo yo dejarlo, de beber nunca me hartí, de tanto amarlo, de beber nunca me hartí, de tanto amarlo. Cuando está en el barril, él no jardín, hago baños de lodo, la vida do por el raquí, no puedo yo dejarlo, de bebé nunca me hartí de tanto amarlo, de bebé nunca me hartí de tanto amarlo.
Yo doy mi vida por aquí, no quiero salir de él, no me canso de beber. Cuando está en la bota sigo bebiendo, la gota se corta cuando llega adentro. Borracho, pidrido como una blanca encendida, hundiéndome en el pollo, boca abajo y en caída. Cuando estoy de viaje me hace compañía, es el mejor Javier de noche durante el día. Siempre me lo paso por la boca, me siento con alegría. Cuando él a mí me toca me pongo a bailar la polka. Bajo la influencia del raquí dentro del control de vivir. No me importa existir, estoy dañado sin intención. Entre la vida y la muerte es mi condición, es mi condición, es mi condición.
La vida do por el rap.
And now a further iteration, which is the use of this very song, which has already been played on, to play a different game, which is La Respuesta do por el Raquí, meaning the answer I give for Raquí, for this drink, as opposed to the life, which is what the original title reads like. And we're joined by Sephardi Rabbi Eliezer Papo to play a game according to which he is going to be presented with two choices. And if he refuses to choose one of these, then he has to drink Raquí. How much Raquí will he drink? We're about to find out.
¿Qué saber, amigos? Bienvenidos a Ladino 21, el cantónico de cuentos, refranes y de vez en cuando raquí.
Hoy vamos a hacer una actividad que se llama la respuesta do por el raquí, aunque vamos a demandar a Eliezer dos opciones y él va a hacer una escolla de esta opción prefiero o la otra me place mucho más. Además, si no va a querer responder a la cuestión, cale que beba raquí. ¿Sí? ¿Estás de acuerdo? Perfecto. ¿Cuál prefieres, Carlos? ¿El judismo o el jaquetía? ¿El judeo español o ladino? ¿El CAL o la universidad? ¿La Turquía o la España?
La Turquía.
¿Ladino 21 o ladino forever?
Ladino 21, aunque sea que no conozco mucho, ni a uno ni a otro.
¿Soletreo o cirílic?
Solitreo, me parece mucho más caligrafíco.
¿UTalk o Duolingo? ¿Borequitas o ropa vieja? Nunca como respondites todo, vamos a beber para gestarlo. Gracias mucho por visitarnos en la Vida 21 y esperamos que nuestra visita tenga muchas y muy hermosas cosas.
So another example of the creativity that the digital archive can foster. The edits were again by Alejandro Acero. And in general, what we see in digital archives is that there is a descriptivist impetus, which does not mean result, right? So people working on the digital archives, archivists and linguists, are trying to be as descriptive as possible and to showcase Ladino as it is spoken in the 21st century, rather than as it should be spoken, as we saw in the case of Ladino Comunidad, right? But that is always nuanced by what I call implicit prescriptivism, the fact that even if we want to be entirely descriptivist, we have to make choices along the way, every step of the way. We have to choose whom to interview, where to interview, in what format, when to upload a video, with what frequency, etc., etc. These are all forms of constraint that restrain that descriptivist impetus that animates digital archives. Then we have another very important advancement, which is community field activism, right? With emails and correspondence circles, we can just send an email from home and that's it. With digital archives, if you want to do it in person, you have to actually go there to that place, go to Istanbul, go to Jerusalem, to New York City, etc. We also have the portrayal of languages as cultural linguistic complexes, more along the lines of translanguaging than standard language ideologies. In other words, we see more diversity within the language, both in the written form, but also and foremost in the audiovisual format. We can hear how Ladino is pronounced by different speakers with different accents using a variety of words that goes well beyond the variety that we can see on an email list. And just like the email lists, it also has user-friendly open access policies, is participative, and contributes to the positive valuation of the language, meaning that we no longer have people thinking that Ladino cannot be compatible with the 21st century because they're seeing it right there, how it's everywhere. It's on YouTube, it's on TikTok, it's on all sorts of Web 2.0 platforms that we use every day. So how could it be otherwise? How could it not belong in the 21st century when it's used every day of it in every country? A quote on ideological transvaluation, which is a central notion here, the idea that because we're seeing Ladino coupled with technology, coupled with hip hop, coupled with the internet, all of this is changing in real time people's perception or misconception of Ladino as a supposedly quote unquote archaic language. So Eisenlohr says a central concern of the use of lesser used languages in electronic mediation is not only encouraging language maintenance and revitalization by providing speakers with opportunities to hear and maintain skills in the language, but also is achieving a transformation of ideological valuations of the language so that the lesser used language is viewed as part of the contemporary world and as relevant for the future of a particular group. Further cases of Web 2.0 platforms that foster that ideological transvaluation is, for instance, WhatsApp groups, right? Like here, estamos WhatsAppeando. You can see a daily image plus text in Ladino and in Hebrew plus the audio. Or Los Ladinadores, the Facebook group by Aldo Sebi, which I highly recommend you join today. Don't wait until tomorrow. Apps to learn Ladino, such as the UTalk app, which we co-developed with Alejandro Acero, right? We essentially contacted the CEO and then translated UTalk's corpus from English into Ladino, and then contacted two L1 Ladino speakers to fly in person to London and register that corpus with their own voices. And of course, the Zoom boom, which I already mentioned, which is the fact that in pandemic times, Ladino experienced a revival on Zoom, and all sorts of programs were created. We have Ladino classes at Oxford University facilitated by Zoom because they're all remote. A Ladino and Hacketilla summer school, which you can still join. We have one spot available for the Ladino class and two for the Hacketilla ones. This is an example of some of the slides that we use in classes at Oxford. The digitalization of newspapers and magazines that only existed offline and had been already discontinued, such as the case of Aki Yerushalayim, were only resuscitated because of the internet. A Sephardic Digital Academy by the Sephardic Jewish Brotherhood of America, offering videos in Ladino related to Sephardic topics, including food, travels, etc. And even an online yeshiva, an online school of rabbinical studies called Mihat Milena, because that is the name of Eliezer's grandmother, and he wanted to honor her. And this was just 2 hours of us reading liturgical texts in Ladino. Now, we also have the Encontros Al Had, which, as the name indicates, Al Had means Sunday in Ladino, are every Sunday, exclusively in Ladino. And finally, we also have Netflix shows such as Kulub and The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem. Now, these shows are vastly important because they foster that sense of national belongingness, while at the same time, they vindicate the place of Sephardim in the nation-state narratives of Turkey, as in the case of Kulub, or Israel, in the case of The Beauty Queen of Jerusalem. So I highly recommend these shows. Now, so far, I've only mentioned positive things about Web 2.0 platforms, but of course, there are negative things as well, which we are about to see. So there is centralization, which I think is a big concern. Most Web 2.0 platforms and initiatives are in the hands of the so-called big tech companies, i.e. GAMAM, which stands for Google, Amazon, Meta, Apple, and Microsoft. And there is also a lack of representation, in particular in digital archives, of the rabbinic social left and non-binary LGBTQ voices and narratives. The latter is something that does not happen in the case of Jewish digital archives, which is interesting. So that definitely is a blueprint to follow. And I think that now we have seen enough developments in Web 1.0 and 2.0 that we can start drawing some preliminary conclusions. So these are some of the best opportunities offered by the internet when it comes to the revitalization of Ladino. It's raising awareness, it's incorporating Ladino international and global narratives, it's empowering the language, it's bringing honor, kavod, and prestige to it, is allowing for community building efforts to be successful, whether it is in the form of digital homelands, as in Michelle Held's notion, or sovereign cloud nations, which I will discuss in the last part of this presentation. And as we saw in the case of Isilor, is leading to a positive ideological transvaluation of the language, showing that Ladino is relevant in the 21st century by making it so. On the other hand, it is also tied to forms of oppression. We have a lack of representation of Ladino in major 2.0 hubs, such as Google Translate, Duolingo, Wix, Instagram, TikTok. You can add ChatGPT there if you want. So there is a problem of platforming. And it's a vicious circle because when we contact these platforms, we often find out that the reasoning is that there is not enough data set of Ladino to include it in their database. But if it's not included in the database, not enough users can deploy it, so not enough data is generated. So that's a vicious circle which is hard to break off from. Digital access gap. Ladino is spoken mostly by 60-plus-year-old people. So this is not the primary demographic for technological innovations and Web 3.0 affordances. That's a problem too. Economic disparities, not everybody has access to the internet everywhere. And finally, something which I think is crucial, so-called algorithms of oppression, which affect search engines, transcriptions, subtitling. And it's basically the fact that while the internet is not necessarily racist and discriminative towards Ladino, it certainly reproduces biases that exist in the offline world. And so that's why when you type a word in Ladino in Microsoft Word, it underlines it as incorrect because it misrecognizes it as Spanish, which means Ladino is invisible. It is effectively erased. Same with search engines. When you type a word in Ladino, you're going to find on Google that it says, did you mean, and then the equivalent in Spanish, right? There are no subtitles in Ladino in the Netflix shows that I just talked about, etc. When you change into the Spanish audio, there is no Ladino. Ladino disappears. There are only Ladino words that you can hear if you hear the show in the original Hebrew or Turkish audio. These are all forms of algorithms of oppression, which is the work of Safiya Al-Moja Noble. And she includes this quote, which I think is very important to bear in mind. algorithmic oppression is not just a glitch in the system. In other words, it's not just an exception to the rule, but rather is fundamental to the operating system of the web, is how the internet works de facto. And finally, Web 3.0, decentralization, blockchain technologies, and token-based economics. Now, this is very much a work in progress. This is also uncharted territory to some extent, but there is no doubt about the fact that we're witnessing a gradual tokenization of cultural heritage and language preservation, and that blockchain can be decisive in that it is decentralized, transparent, updatable, and permanent when it comes to storing information, amongst which linguistic information. So today I'm going to discuss just two promising use cases of Web 3.0, the first of which is the metaverse. Now, there are very many definitions of the metaverse, but here I understand it essentially as an interoperable network of virtual worlds, right? A virtual space beyond, hence the prefix meta, the fractured reality of diaspora in the case of Sephardim, where its members interact smoothly through their avatars with elements of virtual reality as well as augmented reality, right? Which is reality overlaid with digital signs. As in when you're in London and you try to catch a Pokemon next to the London Eye, that Pokemon doesn't really belong in London, but you can see it, right? That's augmented reality. Now, the metaverse has a lot of disruptive potential, particularly because of its immersive experience, the kind of immersive experience that it adds. And there are other aspects that we could include here, but because of the limited time we have, I'm going to jump straight into the second use case of the Web 3.0, which is the so-called network state, to which I have already referred as sovereign cloud nation in this presentation. And it's essentially the idea that if you really think about it, the whole conception of the nation state hasn't really worked out that well for Sephardim, has it? Just yesterday, I was attending a talk about reparative citizenship in the case of Sephardim, right? The fact that Sephardim were offered the possibility of accessing Portuguese and or Spanish citizenship recently. But that is neither new nor should be the last word on the ascription of Sephardim to certain forms of nation. And that is what Srinivasan, Balaji Srinivasan, the author of The Network State, is contending. He's saying, look, the nation state is just historically contingent, and therefore it can be improved upon, and for certain communities which never or rarely ever got to enjoy the benefits of the nation state, rather were colonized, discriminated, expelled from those, we need to come up with something new that lends itself to that extraterritoriality, that diasporic character, and the nation state just doesn't cut it. So in that sense, the network state is the next iteration of the nation state. It's ideologically aligned because all of the members of the network state share the same belief, for instance, that Ladino should be preserved in the 21st century, but it's geographically decentralized, just like diasporic communities themselves. And it goes from the cloud to the land and back. In other words, it's a mixed reality technology. It connects the online and the offline. So Srinivasan offers a number of steps towards the creation of that network state, which we could call Sepharad network state, SNS for short in our case. The first one, you just found an online community, okay? Just like any other virtual community mediated by Ladino that we have discussed so far. Then you build a digital homeland, which, remember, is not the same as a Sephardic virtual community. It also has language ethnicization and a sense of home, which is predicated on 4 factors, right? Once you have enough people in that digital homeland, enough committed members of that community, you meet up in the physical world, which has already happened in the case of Ladino Comunidad or Ladino 21, etc. And this hasn't happened yet, you create an internal economy via your own token. Let's call it the Sefardito or the e-Sephardic token, whatever you want to call it. With that cryptocurrency, once it has acquired enough value and credit in the sense of economic value, but also credere, of the belief that people put behind it, then you get to crowdfund physical nodes, say a house in Philadelphia or an apartment in Valencia. And then you get to connect those physical spaces on the internet, on the digital, through a Web3 crypto passport. So now what you have is a digital group that shares at the same time decentralized physical locations. That is a network state. And once that network state is big enough, it can apply for and gain diplomatic recognition from legacy nation states that are relevant to the Sephardic diaspora, such as Israel or Spain, Portugal, etc., instead of just applying for passports to become a member of that legacy nation state, right? That will be a form of reparative citizenship that we should consider. So in sum, this is just an example of a network state. In sum, we have gone from mere online communities to digital homelands to digital nations, and to the extent to which those digital nations include physical territory that is otherwise connected on the cloud, we can even talk about reverse diaspora, which Srinivasan does in his work, so it's not my term. It's an online first, land last, mixed reality sovereign cloud nations. And you might think to yourself, well, this is too ambitious, Carlos. This is a maximalist aspiration. Surely this won't get done. Well, if you think so, you can still take away the servicing of Web 2.0 communities with Web 3.0 products, which is already happening. So just because you don't believe in the possibility of a Sephardic metaverse or a Sephardic cloud nation, that does not mean that you should discard Web 3.0 when it comes to the revitalization of Ladino. You can still aim lower and try to develop, for instance, a record of the history of the Sephardic community and its language on the blockchain, a record that is immutable, that is transparent, that does not require trust on intermediaries. You can still use memorized apps which have inbuilt algorithms or smart transliteration systems such as Ladino type that allow you to type in, say, Solitreo, or train ChatGPT to respond to and in Ladino, or to implement cryptocurrency as payment rails like we do on Ladino 21. If you don't have fiat currency, you can always send Ethereum or Bitcoin, for instance. Or you can use VR headsets to experience a more immersive type of participation in traditional Web 2.0 services. So say you watch Kulub in a 3D environment through your VR headsets. Those are my thoughts on Web 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0, and how they might get us to revitalize Ladino in the 21st century. Now, I will be more than happy to say merci mucho, PROLang, and everybody else who attended this session. And if you have any questions, I'm all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for this wonderful, informative, rich, and fascinating presentation. If you want to have a look in the chat, there are a couple of comments, and then people can just, yeah, like Alejandro wants to say something. So. Alejandro, you can talk if you want.
Well, no, actually, I was just giving the reaction as a round of applause for Carlos for this presentation. And yeah, it was really enlightening. And I, just joined the chore of voices and thank you for the presentation and bringing this topic to the public. Yeah, I've seen also in the chat that there are some other questions. So I'm thinking I'm gonna give the word to them, and then I will also join the conversation.
Thank you, Alejandro, and thanks again for your work, without which this wouldn't be happening. So there you go. Who else do we have? Ramona, can you help me here?
So there are a couple of comments in the chat. Do you not see them?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So from Pavel Dembowski, who says that he is involved in translations, and then Jordi, who would like to use your lecture for the Ladino 21.
Yes, let me just tackle them one at a time. So yeah, Pavel, thank you so much. As you know, I really appreciate your work on Ladino. Somebody, Matt Ramos, former student of Ladino 21, sent me a link to the Mastodon social network this week. I had a look at it, but I wasn't familiar with that platform. So there's definitely more that I need to understand about it. And I'll be happy to talk to you about it if you have time, so that we can see what the affordances are for the revitalization of Ladino. Yeah, thanks for drawing my attention to it. Okay. And then Jordi says, I will be very grateful if these references, the lecture or the video, could be posted on the Ladino 21. On the Ladino 21 what? Because Ladino 21 is so encompassing that it's transitive. There's always Ladino 21 something, Ladino 21 digital archive or Ladino 21 website.
Yes.
It will work. Yeah,
oh, basically right now, just Facebook. That's the way I actually got, actually found out about the lecture, about your lecture. I will go to Ladino 21 right away and see what else you got. But it'd be very useful because it's a very good list for people who are, I'm not actively involved in the Ladino community. I'm a Spanish speaker, Mexican, but still it would be great. I would love to get more involved.
Okay, great. So you're asking me to post the references as a post on Facebook? Yes.
Yeah,
okay, sure.
That would be useful for, it'd be very useful to have a reference, just a global reference there, like just regular information on the group that could be, help people find out more about what is available nowadays on the digital Ladino landscape.
Yeah, you're completely right. I actually spoke to Alejandro on this, that we should actually create, but the problem with ephemeral social media like Facebook is that you post it one day and then it disappears. So you can either pin it as a post if it's something structural, or create a website section with the references. So I'll do either of those. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And why not buñuelos at the Pavel says this was the only existing specifically Jewish server. Pavel, do you have 2 minutes to explain what Mastodon is about for people who might be interested in this?
It's like a bit of an alternative to Twitter, but it's decentralized. So it's so different people can set up different servers that can talk to each other. You can follow people from other servers. So this is specifically, Jewish and Jewish focused server where for Jews and allies and people who are interested in culture. So that's why this is the one that I approached first.
Interesting. You know Sarah Menor from the Jewish Languages Project might be interested in a platform that is specifically Jewish and can foster the revitalization of endangered Jewish languages. Might be interesting.
Yeah. For now, I was just I've been just testing this, and I'm going to submit it to the translation to when I'm more more happy with the final result. I'll submit it to the official Mastodon release, so they can release it more widely on the Mastodon network.
Oh, okay. So it's still in beta stage. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean the translation is still I'm still working on it, but it's most at least usable.
Great. Keep me posting.
Corrections and stuff.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Other questions, thoughts?
No one else in the chat.
See, I told you, Ramona, it will be 1 hour exact.
Come on,
Yeah,
guys.
come on.
Lily.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thanks, everybody. This was delightful, and well, take care.
Thank
See you
you.
around.
Thank you for attending, Jordi. Well, I mean, if no one else wants to say anything, obviously you have Carlos's email, you can contact him. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. And Carlos, it was absolutely fascinating, your presentation, extremely useful. So, well, have a great evening and see you soon.
Thanks a lot, Ramona, and everybody else. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Ramona, for organizing this.
You're very
Thank you.
welcome.